Hey everybody, happy Sunday. Welcome to Design Details at Music Effect Design, where we demystify the marching arts for you and your program. We're your hosts. I'm Jordan Pittner, a music educator and visual designer out of Phoenix, Arizona.
And I'm Holly Paxton. I'm a color guard educator and a elementary music teacher in Phoenix, Arizona.
And my name is Mike Kruger. I'm a music educator, conductor, and composer out of Cleveland, Ohio. And tonight we are joined by our special guest and friend, Randy Greenwell. Randy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Holly and Jordan. And Michael, it's great to talk to another St. Louisan again, even though
yes,
both of us have migrated to elsewhere. I live in Indianapolis and have done so for many years. As you mentioned, I'm working for Conn Selmer as an educational support manager and also their Marching Winds product manager, a job that I took on starting in March. So kind of doing both dual roles there, but taught for 32 years and last job was at Lawrence Central High School and I was there for 24 years. And during the course of that time, started doing some designing and writing myself and also have been judging actually since I got out of college because I had some friends that were judges and got involved in the activity. Started judging for DCI in 92, I believe. And then picked back up with DCI in 2009 and WGI and Bands of America for a long time. So.
Well, Randy, thanks again for jumping on in with us tonight. We're excited to talk about your expertise in these various fields as an educator and as an adjudicator. And so I just got a question for you because you said you've been teaching overall for 32 years, right? Or you did? It was 32-year teaching career.
Yep. Yep.
So
yes.
I have a question for you, and that is, say you're a band director. You're a band director, educator, and you get to the school, your first year at the school, and you look around and you want to go somewhere and do something, but you're not sure where to even begin. How do you begin to grow a program? So my question to you is, do you have any advice or tips or suggestions, or what did you do to envision a plan and act on it?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, most of the advice that I give is a result of mistakes that I made. And so I can tell you two ways, one way that worked and one way that didn't. I mean, my first 3 or 4 years, I was really concerned about my goals and I didn't build and forge the student relationships like I probably should have. I mean, it wasn't like I was losing kids left and right, but I think if I knew then what I know now, I would have made that a priority. So I think to answer your question, just developing the culture, developing the relationships, helping the kids understand that you care about them first, because kids, they don't care what you know until they know you care about them. So it's really important to do that and really take some time to kind of feel out what the culture was prior to you getting there and what it's going to take. I heard a young educator do this last year. Actually, it was at Greenwood High School, Mike. A young teacher had only taught a couple of years and he was replacing a very popular director who had taught for 15, 20 years. And first thing he said to the kids was, "It's okay. I've got to figure you guys out and you guys got to figure me out, but I'm not going to change anything right now. This is a lot harder on you than it is on me. So let's just start there and keep going." And I thought, that's pretty remarkable for somebody that has taught very little to be that intuitive of what the students needed at that particular point in time. And so I think that's the first key, because if you don't have good, positive relationships, it doesn't matter what your goals are. If you're just pushing kids around, you're going to lose them.
For sure. Makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm curious, Randy, you said in your first few years, you learned a lot about that and kind of changing your goals from others. What was it like trying to change culture as you went from, your first few schools? You said you worked at 3 different schools, right? What were the differences as you went from school to school?
The first position, it wasn't tough, I don't think, for the kids because I had a lot of energy and they had been through a lot of director changes. But there was still a pretty solid focus to the performing arts there. So think that was probably easier than my second job. My second job, larger school, but a very popular predecessor. And I came in trying to be like that person. I had literally tried to modify my personality so that and it was a huge mistake. I mean, I really battled that. The senior class did not like me at all. And the junior class loved me. So I managed to survive it. But I mean, there were some telling times there because I just could not, I think I was trying too hard is essentially what ended up happening. I just tried too hard. When I got to Lawrence, that program, of course, was a large metropolitan area, and that's where I ultimately wanted to be. There had been somebody there before me that was not in the best of light with the administration and the school board. So that part was easy to some degree, but it was also tough because there was a lot of mistrust of the band director in general. Really gotten scarred by this predecessor that had been there. He was very unprofessional, and I think they kind of thought that all band directors were that way, and it was like, no. And so Matt James, my associate, we just kind of chuckled about it, but we just got through it, and it was fine. I mean, there was a little bit of a culture shock to the kids, I think, at the time, because they had never made state finals in Class A. They had made it in Class B before, but they'd never made it in A. And I don't think they believed they could. And so we had some reprogramming of the mind that had to happen. And it took us about a year and a half to do that. And it worked out okay.
That's cool. When you talk about reprogramming of the mind, what are some examples of that?
They had just been jaded about what quality really was. I mean, I can remember the first rehearsal with the Winds in 1993, and I remember exactly where we were. Matt and I were both in the room with the brass, and we were in the orchestra room, and we were doing a sectional, and we're just working on fundamentals of articulation. And it was like, but they had been told to articulate very harshly, and they really did not like us telling them that we needed to do it differently. And so there was a lot of over educating about what it was like to learn and just develop that. They had really been built up to believe that they were, this is a group that finished 22nd out of 23 bands at the regional, but they were still being told that this was quality, and that this, there was a lot of us against them, and the band was not viewed very popularly in the school culture. We had a lot of reprogramming to do. And honestly, we spent a lot of time teaching the kids how to play and developing relationships. And that's where we started. In fact, I even told the principal during my interview, I said, because their goal was, we want to win state finals. And I went, well, I'll tell you what, I've heard the band, we're going to learn how to play in our chairs first, and then we'll get to that. Eventually, if that happens for us, great, but we're going to learn how to play our horns first. Yeah. And that was essentially what we had to do. And that's one of the reasons, honestly, that Matt and we had never worked together before. That's one of the reasons why we got along so well. And we knew going in that we were going to fit, because we had talked, and he had been out to my program and seen me work at Yorktown. And so we had spent some time together, and we shared a lot of the similar philosophies about how to go about teaching and how to go about programming the kids so that they could be successful.
I love the focus on the student. I mean, I think you know this from our talks in the past, Randy, but I believe very strongly in the that success starts with building the individual, making sure that the individual feels at home, and providing a culture that is supportive. And so I believe so strongly in that. And a lot of times I've seen that culture will lead to better technique, which will then lead to like better success and excellence. And then like ultimately you get it. Like you get what this music thing is about.
Right.
And so go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, with that culture, I mean, great teachers will explain what you're doing. They'll explain why you're doing it, and then they'll explain how you're going to do it. And a lot of teachers don't get past the first step,
right.
Or they invert the steps. And it's like, if you're not doing that, and the kids don't believe that you have their best interest, That's the secret sauce, man, that makes it all work. And if you can't do that, and if you don't show some passion for what you're doing, and that's the other part, and I talk about this in leadership all the time. If you demand that kids practice, but you yourself are not prepared, then you're losing every day, and you don't even realize it, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you say I had a similar conversation with my brass sectional earlier about preparation. And I was like, one section was just a little less prepared. And I was like, man, you would probably feel pretty awful if I came in here and dropped a beat every single passage. Like, it probably wouldn't work out too well. I was like, so, like, come on. I was like, you know what I mean? And so it's funny that you say that, because I strongly believe in that. I think that, you know, a leader does what they ask. And so preparedness, practice, patience, all of those same things, you know, we have to have. And so I think that, so let's say, so you said it took a year and a half, 2 years to get the culture kind of getting adjusted at Lawrence Central. So here's my question is you got, obviously, in your tenure there, that program really achieved a lot of excellence. And I mean, in a large variety of showings. And so, so you get the culture down. And I think this is where I, in my stage of my career, I can use advice too, is you get the culture and then you say, okay, I want to raise the bar of what we're doing. And like, I want to raise the excellence one notch higher. We have the team, we can do this now. How do we get better? And that's where I think a lot of educators get a little bit lost. It's like, okay, we start getting this. Now we actually have to play better. We can do it now. Do you have any advice or experiences in that and what you did? Or
I think that there's a lot of, you have to approach it from a lot of different aspects. One is, I think you have to be willing to make yourself better as a musician. You have to continue to try to get better. I was taking conducting lessons. I was working on a master's degree. I was constantly, engaged in that way. And the kids were seeing me learn. Stan would come over and beat Matt and I up on the podium every, week. And so the kids were seeing that, and the kids became very intuitive and very responsive to conductors because of that experience. So I think it's the experience that you give them, and that there are a variety of experiences. But I think once it's kind of like chocolate or something that you really enjoy. Once you taste it, like sugar or whatever, you become addicted to it. And kids, students, performers become addicted to sounding really good. They become addicted to making great music. And so you have to get them to that first experience. And if that's just on a concert F and tuning an F major chord and they hear it ring and their hair raises up on their arms, then that's what it is. And then you take that next step and you say, now let me show you this. Now let's experience this. And you bring people in and you create a culture of experiences. I think that's where you motivate them to get better. And then along with that, you can't be afraid to have some expectations. And you can structure your program that way where it's like the kid can choose the level of expectations they want to meet. So if you wanted to be in wind ensemble at Lawrence Central, you had to take private lessons. You had to know all 12 major scales with arpeggios, 2-3 octaves. You had to be able to do those in 3 minutes or less. If you wanted to be in the second band, then you only had to know 8 major scales and arpeggios, and you had to be able to do those. And if you were in concert band, then it was 4 scales. And so the kids knew they could reach for whatever, but those bars weren't going to change.
Right.
They weren't going to change. And you can do that in an endearing way. But I think the mistake that a lot of us make, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't realize this till probably the last 7 or 8 years of teaching, as our demographics changed a bit and we had kids that couldn't afford lessons or they couldn't bring a horn home in their living environment, was teaching them how to practice. So I literally remember one day sitting down with an etude that we had given and I just literally walked them through step by step, because I started listening to myself and going, you keep saying practice, 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 but what does that mean to a kid? I mean, they're just going to play through it a few times, play wrong rhythms, play wrong notes. So just doing that, getting them to learn to engage their ears. I'm firmly believe that a lot of educators don't use their ears. I really believe that we're married to this. And we have, that's weird. You can't really see it, my phone. We're married to our devices, right?
Right.
And so we check a list. It's like, okay, I did my Tone Energy app. I did my Harmony Director. But during those experiences, did you ask them to achieve anything? Did you give them any valuable feedback? Did you have them use their ears so that they can become self-sufficient? And did you use your ears? And if those things aren't happening, I was listening to a Denzel Washington thing the other day. He says, you can do a lot of things. It doesn't mean you're getting a lot of things done. So it's doing the right things, when you're doing those concert apps or when you're working on scales, it's doing the right things. And if they're not getting better, get them, get somebody in to listen to them and say, try this, try this, try this,
Right.
Absolutely. I'm curious. It sounds like you're very open with your students about your continued education, getting your master's, taking lessons, doing those things. Could you speak a little bit to the value of being open with your students about that?
Yeah, and that's great. I'm glad you asked that, Jordan. I call it vulnerability. I don't know if anybody has read Brené Brown's books, but she has the one book on vulnerability. And I think it's really important for educators to be vulnerable in front of their students. And I don't mean in a weird way. I just mean in a way in which they can see you engaged in the learning process.
Right.
And they know that I'm not saying you have to cry in front of them or whatever, but just saying you have to be able to show them that, like, I used to play my horn in class all the time. And I made probably more mistakes than I ever played right notes. And I would do it in front of the kids. And it's like, I just did it. And I would say, I missed this note, I missed this, I missed that. And they just kind of look at me like, oh. And it's just like, you have to have that sense of humility, because what that does is that creates that environment of, it's a safe zone to learn. You can make mistakes. It's okay. It doesn't mean I'm not going to get on your rear end if you make a mistake. I still gonna have those expectations, but I do it out of love. I don't do it out of, I gotcha.
Right.
It's not a gotcha type moment. And I got better at that as I got more experienced as a teacher. I actually had a student one time that dropped my class because I told them they were playing out of tune. And I still, this day, that just really, and I shouldn't dumb it down to something like that, but I think it might've been the way I said it.
Sure.
It just really offended them. And so I really started thinking about, okay, maybe I just need to not say it that way.
Were they really out of tune? No, I'm just.
Yeah, they were.
15 cents flat.
Yeah, it was just like, and this student was a very good student. They were an overachiever, and their father was on the school board, and they were very nice people, and they didn't come back at me or anything, but yeah, he just dropped the class second semester, and I'm like, man. And I was talking to one of the kids. I said, yeah, he didn't like the fact that you called him out because he played out of tune, and I'm like, okay, so. I had to find a different way to frame it. So, and I think the reflection part of teaching is very, very, very important. I'm working on a book called The Young Person's Guide to Being an Inspiring Music Educator. And the focus is for young educators. And it basically goes through all my mistakes and it talks about ways to approach situations, all kinds of different things in a band director's realm of their job, how to approach those things. But I think, one of them is certainly learning how to talk and learning how to communicate with students, because not all students are the same.
That's so cool.
Yeah. I love how, like, so many of the things you've talked about so far, just, I feel like it could be really easy to settle into a position at a school when you're there for a long time and just like, well, it worked for me for the first 5 years. I'm going to do it the same until I retire. But it seems like you've done the opposite of like, okay, what's the next best thing? How can I do the right thing for these kids?
Yeah. And I'll be honest with you. I mean, our demographics changed significantly. We were 10% free and reduced lunch when I came there, 80% when I left. I either had to make the choice to make changes, or I was going to do exactly what you were saying, Holly. I was going to die on the vine. I mean, I was going to be that clueless teacher that had no idea why I wasn't connecting, why kids were dropping my class, why, and I went from, there was a period of time, I will be honest, there was a period of time where I was the victim. I felt like, oh God, I worked so hard to get this pro. And now we got to, I played the victim for maybe about 6 weeks. And then I woke up one morning, I went, you know what, you got a choice. You can either go somewhere else or you can really do this job well. These kids need to be taught. And so I just decided I was going to be a problem solver. And so if I didn't have the answer, I went somewhere else. And I think that's the other thing too for young educators is because of our technology, if it's not easy and it doesn't happen the first time, we get frustrated. And man, the journey is, I mean, we talk about that in leadership all the time. I'm sure you guys have used this analogy before, like Thomas Edison. It wasn't until the 1001 time that the light bulb happened, and it was the journey. It wasn't the destination that he was concerned with. And so it's hard if you don't allow students to understand that you got to fall forward and not backwards,
Yeah.
I stole that from Denzel Washington too, falling forward.
I'm gonna put that in my own notes for today.
From.
Watch more Denzel.
That's right.
Love that. Cool.
Randy, one of the things I've got a lot of questions on mine, but one of the things that's a little bit different than it ties into education. But I think one of the things that got me excited at a young age was just music. To me, even now, it's why lecture courses are fine, lessons are fine, sure. But there's nothing I enjoy more than being an ensemble director. I love live music. I love it's just fun. Mm-hmm. And I think students can gain and appreciate that very early. I think a lot of people can appreciate, like you said, when you make a great sounding F or F major chord, they appreciate it. I think students appreciate just quality music too. Mm-hmm. And I think they appreciate quality musicianship. So one of the things that really impressed me years ago working with you was the art of conducting, the actual art itself on the podium. Mm-hmm. Is that a skill set? Is that a skill set that you find to be equally important to the role of an educator?
Absolutely. And, I could get on my soapbox about that for the rest of the session. I mean, being an effective conductor requires you to have a dedication to studying the craft, just like you do your instrument or just like you do, Michael, as a composer. I mean, you have to study your craft. You can't just say, oh, I want to be a composer, so I'm a composer. I mean, it takes a lot of effort, and a lot of work. And I don't think that that always gets priority in some people's teaching. I think that the conducting thing is the last thing that they're worried about. And I think to be a more effective teacher, if you can be a more effective conductor, you can be a much more effective teacher. But I want to go back to that comment about listening to music, because I used to talk to the students about this all the time. I would, because of the standards that you set, sometimes you get parents and kids that say, well, you're just trying to turn me into a professional musician. And it's like, no, that's not it. I'm trying to turn you into someone who appreciates great music and is going to go out and buy a concert ticket that has something in their life that they can enjoy. That's an art form that you can enjoy the rest of your life to relieve stress, to make you feel better, all those things. And man, I'll tell you what, if I was teaching right now, I'd be going like full bore on that as a teacher with students is check this out, check this out, check this out, check this out, and just listen to a variety of things, because there's so much great music out there that we're never going to run out of great music. I mean, there's just so much of it out there, and free access to it through YouTube and everything else. And I used to buy albums, and I tell them that story, buying albums. And the other part of that is that students do learn differently, and some learn by watching, some learn by doing, some learn by being told. When it comes to listening, some students listen different than others. And I tell them the story about when I was in 7th grade and I was at a jazz concert, and my jazz trumpet teacher was behind me, and it was Thad Jones and Mel Lewis live. And I fell asleep during an improvised solo, and he whacked me upside the head and he said, "What's wrong with you?" And I was like, man, I just don't get it. And so next lesson, I go to my next lesson. He goes, okay, you said you don't get it. So now we're going to start working on jazz improvisation. And as soon as I started understanding it, I loved it. So a lot of what they don't, if they can't readily understand it right away, they get turned off by it. And so you have to find ways to give them small bites, so that it's really pretty cool. And students that I called it the musical exchange. It's like I'll I'll play something for you, and then you pick something, and a lot of times, quite frankly, it was rap or something like, or some kind of pop thing that I hadn't heard. But you have to do that too, because if you can't have that exchange, then what you end up having is what happens with parents, right? I can't believe you listened to that stuff. Back in the day, I listened to
kids these days, right?
It's like that's what ends up happening. It's a generational gap that's not as prevalent now. I mean, that's not as prevalent now as it was, mainly because of technology, right? Because we have access to all sorts of things. I think you have to find ways, you have to find gateways to get kids to like classical music. I often play students the Dudamel performance with the youth orchestra playing mambo. Everybody's seen that, where the kids are spinning their horns. They see the visual part of that and they're drawn to it, and then they're drawn to the music. So sometimes you just have to find a different way to get through the door with them, and then you got them hooked,
Yeah, for sure. This is a big question, I know, but for anybody who's a young educator who's listening, what are just a few of your staple favorite pieces?
Oh, geez. That's a loaded question. We could be here all day.
Right.
A Granger is always a favorite. Lincolnshire Posy. The Malcolm Arnold Scottish Dances is one of my favorites. Basically anything from those two composers, and I'm locked and loaded. I really like a lot of Omar Thomas's stuff that's come out. I think that he is speaking to a new voice that we need to have in the band world. There's so many great pieces out there, but those would be some of my favorites. I like concert marches. I don't love to play them as a player so much, mainly because when I was in college, I had a professor that the first thing we did every concert rehearsal was warm up on 4 German marches. Like, march again. But there's some real gems out there march wise that I do with my community band that I love. I like a lot of the Japanese composers too. There's so much good stuff out there. One of the pieces that I really like that doesn't get played very much anymore is the Robert Russell Bennett, the Symphonic Dances. I love that piece, and it doesn't get played a lot. People are afraid of it because all the style stuff.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
That's fun. It's fun to always ask people what their favorite pieces are. You never know what you never know what you're going to get for sure.
Yeah, and I said symphonic dance. I said symphonic dances. Suite of old American dances is what I wanted to say.
I gotta play that in my last semester of grad school. Actually, I
love that piece.
And it was Professor Colburn, Mike Colburn, had picked that, and he had done that quite a few times over the years with the Marine Band. And he was like, "All right, check this out." And I remember being like, "All right, this is pretty hard."
But, I remember the first time I conducted Persichetti, the symphony. I love that piece. Every time I hear it, I just love it. And anything from that era, Hindemith, those are great. But
I think we should do another episode which we talk about literature, because this would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, right.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. We should. For real, that'd be fun. You said Persichetti. I always think that Divertimento is such a great introduction piece, because it's not too crazy hard, but a great introduction piece to kind of more sophisticated music for younger folks. I just love Persichetti. So I'm glad you said that.
John Boyd from Indiana State, he passed away recently. He was the director of bands. He did a really great setting of that for brass quintet. That's
really
that's cool.
Yeah. The Divertimento.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
So Randy, I have kind of one last kind of question that's education design, but like education based, but also kind of like the band administrator logistical side. Because as I think anyone who's a young director is finding out, that there's a lot more to it than just teaching on the band if you're doing marching band. So when you were at Lawrence Central, because one of the things you said earlier, I think with your introduction, was figuring out this whole design thing and figuring out. So when you went to Lawrence Central and you were working there, how did you start to go about just designing the marching season, whether it was the show or the logistical planning for that? Because I know that's a huge project, especially for larger programs that compete seriously. Mm-hmm. So I'm really curious on what that process just kind of looks like from a director standpoint.
Yeah, the first job is to, in November or whenever your season ends, is to do that decompression chamber where you sit down as a staff and you talk about the things that went well and the things that did not go well, the things you want to keep, the things you don't want to keep, and then start. Just you got to take some time off, maybe a month, and then starting mid-December, you've got to start that process of talking about some ideas. Brett Kuhn and I design a lot of stuff together, and we always talk when we're talking to directors. It's always, you got to have a concept first because there's tons of great music. There's only so many visual ideas. There's only so many different visual ideas out there. There's certainly a lot more music than there are visual ideas. Now, there might be people that would take exception with that, but for the most part, I think that's probably true, at least at the high school level. And so I think I think back in the days, in the mid 90s, we were probably finding some great music and then getting a concept to go with it. But that morphed into, okay, now we've got a concept and we're going to find some music to fit to it. And I think the activity has evolved so much. The performance qualities are so much better than they were. They get better every year. And it's just incredible what students are able to do, what performers are able to do, especially at the DCI and WGI levels. And so, but I think that has to happen. And I think if, as a band director, if you're not going to be the program coordinator, you got to hire one. But the band director can do that job. I really believe that. You just have to make sure that you're maintaining everything, that you're very, very clear about timelines and expectations. And the other part that doesn't happen a lot with younger educators is they get the package and they never have been attached to it prior to the entire package being done. Mm-hmm. They assume that everything they're getting is going to work. They assume that there won't have to be any changes. That just doesn't work that way. And I would, and Jordan, you'll appreciate this. I would rather change 5 bars of music than change drill. If I've got to restage,
I do appreciate that.
If I have to rescore something, that's easier for me to do than it is to rewind and impact things that were happening after and things that were happening before.
Right.
And the other part for Holly here, with color guards, band directors, communicate with your color guard people and tell them what you're doing dynamically and tell them what you're doing with reshaping of dynamics and everything. And if you change something, tell them and talk to them about it, because and I learned that because I made a mistake of not doing that. And Greg Hagan was a great mentor for that, because I'd get that look like, did you change that? I'm like, yeah. Oh, great. Now I got to rewrite 16 counts of work. Color guard, let's go. So I mean, it does make a difference. Communication is big in that design process. And I think you have to decide who's going to have a voice on the design staff, or who's going to have a voice on your staff. Mm-hmm. There has to be a line drawn professionally between design staff and techs, and people that teach the show, and there are people that design the show. And if they do both, that's fine, but you have to be able to monitor that as the director so that it doesn't get stupid, because otherwise it's the tail wagging the dog. I've written for programs that the young tech staff is telling the director how things should go, and they have no experience in design whatsoever. They have no understanding about what the choices that were made, why they were made, how they were made. And that could be a real barn burner of a bonfire in the end for the students if that communication isn't clear,
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the big talking points we had. We did some design episodes months ago.
Just feels like years.
It does feel,
the COVID magic.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But months ago we did some design episodes, and one of the big things we talked about was communication. And I heard you say that a few times, was that ultimately there's going to be different processes, but communication from getting input from the people who matter, from the people who you should be talking to, and then also output, being able to give that back. And so,
Yep. And I would much rather have a designer that cares about the students they're designing for than have somebody that cares about their ego.
right.
That is such a difficult thing, to have to let somebody go because their ego is just getting in the way of everything. And I think it's just really, really important that everyone understand that we're in it for the students. We're not in it for our own, everybody wants, I don't think anybody sets out, Jordan, Michael, Holly, have you ever tried to design a bad show? I don't think
Right.
I don't think anybody ever wants.
You figured me out.
Yeah.
It's like the Hamburglar of bands.
Yeah, I don't think anybody ever sets out to design anything that's bad.
Right.
I think what happens a lot of times with the product is a lack of communication or a lack of understanding, or the designer's paradigm is just so completely whacked compared to where yours is that it just doesn't work.
Right.
Right.
And that can happen, but most of the time, I call it flavor of the month. I hate it when a designer loses their job, because most of the time what that is to me is that, the band director is looking for the silver bullet. And,
Right.
and what really needs to happen is you just have to work together better as a team, and you need to communicate better, because there's a reason you picked that person to begin with in the first place, right? Hopefully.
Right.
So I just think there's a lot of that goes on that's unnecessary, and it's the result of really poor communication.
Fully agreed.
Been a part of those before.
Oh yeah.
And it's not a good time.
Yeah.
So I know as an educator, you've been able to be, you've obviously mentored tons of students, and from not just high school levels, but also students you've met, throughout the years in various other forms. I mean, young professionals, probably college students. And so one of the things I think that is really unique about yourself is your large, experience and expertise in adjudication, because I think that in many ways, mentorships or great advice can be found in judging and adjudication. And so I'm curious, as a judge who's been doing this for many, many years, how did you get started? How does one even get started in judging?
I basically was around a lot of judges through college. I was, the drum major at Illinois State. And so we used to have to be the judge assistant for the judge that was judging the invitational that we hosted every year. And I just really enjoyed watching them go about their craft, and realized that it took a lot of training. And so I got involved with that organization, started training my first year teaching, started judging. And I think for young people that want to get involved in it, the best way to do it is to just go to a show or sit in front of your computer screen and just start talking and get used to talking to people, hopefully intelligently on in a format that allows yourself to kind of get comfortable with that part of it.
Yeah.
And then the discipline of being able to stay with the sheet and all of that comes from trial and error. I mean, most organizations or most circuits will have you do a certain number of trials before you're able to judge for them. And I think that, we're always looking for judges. I mean, the main thing, I think it's about the perspective of how you go about it. You have to work at it like you do anything else. Right. And I was not good at it when I started out. I mean, I was awful. And it got better because I kept trying to do it, and I started figuring out, and then the whole numbers management piece is a whole nother thing. And I'll be honest with you. I mean, that's a part that I struggled with for a long, long time. And probably not until within the last 15 years, I started feeling comfortable with that. And there are people that won't judge simply because of that piece of it. They're just like, nope, don't want to do the numbers. And so, but the other part of it, from an educational perspective, as a musician and as an educator, it really helped me with my perspective on things too, to see what designers go through, to see what, the struggles are the same that I go through when I was teaching and things like that. And you can have that educational empathy, but you still have to give them the input, and they can take it or leave it. But I mean, it's really, it really changes your perspective on some things. I changed the way that I approached critiques when I was younger, as I started judging more. because I realized that, by and large, with the exception of maybe WGI and DCI, critiques are kind of a waste of time at the high school level to some degree, because what you end up doing is you rehash a lot of what you've already said,
right.
or you're fighting with them about, or not fighting, they're fighting with you or yelling at you about your number. And it's just not an effective way to go about things. I mean, I think I discovered that when I started doing the Bands of America circuit, because I didn't need to go to a critique. The tapes were good enough. I knew everything I needed to do. I knew the checklist. I got everything I needed out of the tape. There was no reason for me to sit down. Now, DCI and WGI is different. You're seeing this judges week in and week out. It's a long process, right? It's a much longer season.
Sure.
The shows are much more complicated. There's a dialogue that has to take place, to educate the judge about what's going on in the design process, things that you might be missing, especially in today's world. I mean, DCI, the top 6, 7, it's like, really?
Right.
You really have to, they're just so phenomenal, and all the cores are phenomenal, but I mean, especially those top 6 or 7 are just on a playing field that you just have to really do your homework. You have to study. And so getting ready for DCI is a 2-week process, because you get the programs and you study the music and you study the programs, and you go to school for 2 weeks before you go out and judge. Because if you don't, you're not going to give them any feedback that's worthwhile.
Sure.
It's just not going to happen.
Makes sense. I think judges play such an important role in the betterment of the activity, if it is approached from the director's side in the right way, right? And then others, we could probably talk about that for a long time. Yeah. When you're judging, what are your top priorities, and how do you go about achieving that on any given day?
Well, the first thing for me is always, it's about the music, and it's about what they sound like and what they're communicating. I'm sorry, I just dropped my auxiliary plug in here. So I think for me, it's, the first thing is, do they have a sonority? That's the first one. I mean, if they have a sonority and they have a blend and it's mature, then that automatically puts a group in a different playing level than those who do not. And I think you have to figure out very early on in the first minute or so who you're speaking to, because your job is to be endearing and educating. And there's different ways that you have to talk to groups with less or more experience because of that. So, but you still have to do it professionally, and you still have to do it from the, as if I would speak to my own students. So I would speak to my concert band in a slightly different way than I would speak to my wind ensemble, because of the level of understanding and the level of ability. Right. And I think you have to do that. And that's not incriminating the groups that are younger at all. It's just, that's what it is. That's what your job is. You have to speak to what you're hearing and seeing. And then the other part you have to really avoid is trying to rewrite their show for them. I think that's what irritates a lot of educators when they get a tape and, 2 minutes in, you're trying to rewrite their show. I don't think, that's not a good way to do things. I think you just have to maybe ask questions and get them to think about it. And if you feel very strongly about it, so you might think about, and I would never use the word rewrite, you might think about approaching this differently or trying something differently here and see if that works for you. If it doesn't, no worries. It's the way you message it. It's the way you talk. And that's the part that I think some people in the judging community don't always figure out early on. And they have to figure that out, because there's just not, at the WGI and the DCI ranks, there's no tolerance for that. There just isn't. I mean, if you can't figure out how to speak and speak professionally and do it in a way that they're going to listen to you, then you're dead in the water.
It's a different world in WGI.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yep.
Yeah.
Randy, on the flip side, a judging related question, but as a director, say you go compete and you get your tapes and you get your sheets. What, as a director, what is the first thing you can do? Like, what are the first things you do to make those comments, the tapes, papers, whatever, meaningful? Like, what do you look for? Do you look for the number? Are you looking for comments? Like, how do you make something meaningful?
I look for the general impression, the overreaching impression at the beginning and then at the end, to see how that changes over time, because that's what's going to because that's what the judge is doing. They're getting an impression and they're trying to justify that through time. And as it changes, if it changes widely, then their commentary is going to dictate that. Right. So I listened to the tone and the direction of the commentary. And then I listened to places where I was certain that there were things that I thought were coming across from an effect perspective, and to see whether or not they are coming across to them. And if they're not, then that's the conversation I want to have. Is I want to say, okay, this is a section where we were expecting this reaction. Can you tell me why perhaps you didn't get that reaction? I want to know. And it's not because there might be a time where I think they missed something, because all of us miss something. And when you judge, you realize how much you actually miss. I miss a ton, on a first read. But I will try to clarify for them, or try to point out that this is a section we're really concerned about. Can you talk a little bit about that section to us? And why was it a concern for you, or why was it not a concern? And those usually lead to really productive critique conversations. Back in my younger days, I probably brought up numbers way too much. Really not too worried about that. When I'm going into a critique to speak to somebody, it's more for clarification. It's not for them to feel like I'm going after them.
On the flips, that makes a lot of sense. It seems like a lot of directors have a similar end goal of being able to get information to reflect and hopefully critique their group, their staff, but they have so many different processes and what they're looking for and how they go about it. And I've never thought of going from beginning and end before, like looking at those two things separately. I've never really thought about that. So that's something we used to pick up on right now.
Matt James and I used to play a game at Grand Nationals. We would listen to our prelims tapes, and we both would write a number down based on the impression we were getting from the tape, and we would keep that number written down until we got our recaps at the end of finals, and see how close we got. And it was interesting. It really was, because you want to know going in what they're feeling good about, because in that short game where you maybe have an 8-hour turnaround, you got a 2-hour rehearsal, you want to know what you got to hit, what you got to focus on. And that's really, really important. So.
Do you think that calibration thing helps you, or is it just like a fun game from the numbers side?
I think it was a fun game to play, but it was also kind of a truth teller to be able to see where our liabilities were, where things didn't quite hit the box that we thought may have hit the box, or people didn't react the way we thought we wanted them to react. And it's about the effect. I mean, at that point in time, if you're not communicating, if you're not communicating to the audience or to the people in the box, then you're in trouble anyway.
Right.
I know that it's not necessarily about the numbers from the director's side, obviously, but from the judging side, it is, right? And figuring out how the numbers add up and how everything tallies up. One of the first time I ever judged, which is probably about 7 years ago now, is I had no idea what I was doing. And I had all these extra sheets around me with tally marks and who I thought at that point had done best so far, and to make sure that I was at 20 bands to make sure I wasn't royally screwing up everything. And so I think that part of it is very serious and can get hard to do. And so how do you figure out how to manage numbers? Any advice on how to figure out how to manage numbers, and also how to figure out what the value of a point actually is and how you separate that?
Well, and it's different with some circuits, right? I mean, some circuits, it's the value of a tenth in a subcaption. Some circuits, it's the value of a tenth in the overall score. And that does make a difference. The first thing is you got to take notes. You got to take notes because you'll forget things. Some of my judge colleagues that are very technically savvy, they take an iPad, they take a picture of the group so they remember the color of the uniform, and then they do notes on that picture so that they've got that, especially if they're going to a critique situation. I'm the old-fashioned, pen and paper guy. I take notes in a notebook, and it's usually things that I may not say on the recording, but general impressions that I've got, things that I want to remember to talk to them about that may not have been on the recording, and impressions that I have. It's much easier nowadays with the advent of technology and competition suite to be able to go back and change numbers,
Sure.
And the number management piece, a lot of that largely depends on your experience and where the floor is. Like usually most shows you go to, the panel agrees to where the floor is going to be. That's part of the pre-judge commentary with the chief judges. This is kind of where the floor needs to be. Don't go into box one, blah, blah, that kind of thing. And so you kind of know that. And just being consistent with yourself and not worrying about stay in your lane. Like they preach that at DCI, stay in your lane, don't
Right.
worry if the color guard person has somebody at 19 and you only have them at a 17.5. That's two completely different captions, two completely different things. Do not panic about that. Stay in your lane, have the discipline to understand that. And then as you're going through, and Wayne Dillon, my buddy Wayne Dillon, who's a DCI judge, and he's one of the music coordinators for the judging community for DCI. Wayne's great. And he told me one time, he said, he goes, when I listened to a group, after about the first minute, I started thinking, okay, was that first minute better than, and when I start thinking about where this group is sizing up, okay, that's where I think they are. Now, is that going to continue as time goes on? And I started doing that. It does make a big difference. I mean, if you start thinking, okay, first of all, where do they fit in the box? And then where are they compared to everyone I've heard so far? Then it's much easier to get a number. If you don't do that and you go to put a number down, chances are you're going to be lost. And that's a really anxiety filled moment. And I've experienced those back in my younger days. And even sometimes it's some really big shows. I mean, the first time I did that San Antonio BOA regional.
Oh my gosh.
Holy smokes. There's only so many 14s, right? And so, and that's back when it was still 2 days. And so I talked to my buddy, Mike Anderson, about that. And he said,
Man.
even and odd. I go, what are you talking about? He says, use even numbers the first day and odd the next. And it works, because you can still get the proper spreads, but you don't run out of numbers as quickly.
Right.
But then you have to get to half tenths and all that other stuff. But that can cause a lot of people anxiety. But I think the big thing is making sure that as you're rolling through, put them in a box, justify where they're at, see if they stay there, because they're gonna deviate. There's some groups that'll be in box 4 and then they'll drop down to 3A or 3B, then they'll pop back up to 4, and you kind of have to. And what you were saying, I think, is putting little marks and stuff. Some people do that. Some people do a little graph. It's whatever works for you personally.
So cool.
Yeah.
Well, Randy, thank you so much for being here today. This has been so much information. I know we kind of said 3 or 4 times there, 3 different topics we could have discussed for a whole day, but just to get kind of a surface level here has been so good and into the details. So thank you. We'll have you just do one more wrap up, one final thought for the people watching. Before we do that, we'll just invite everybody back here every Sunday, 3:00 Eastern. We'll be here. We'll be either talking amongst ourselves about a different topic or, interviewing an educator like we are today. We've got blog posts, everything on our website, musiceffectdesign.com. And if there's anything you want to find out more about, please email us. Info@musiceffectdesign.com is a great place to find us. We're interested in learning more about what you all want to know more about. That's, what we want to do. So, Randy, close us out.
Yeah, well, thanks, Michael and Holly and Jordan for having me on the show. I think it's a great thing that you're doing for educators and performers, and keep doing it. We need this, especially during this time. I guess the last thing I will leave you with is, just whatever you do, whatever you choose to do in life, don't live your life just to do something. Live your life to do it and do it to your fullest, and dedicate the right amount of time. And don't be afraid of failure, because failure is a great teacher. I'm living proof of that. I've failed more times in my life than I ever succeeded. And it's just one of those things that will teach you. And as I was saying, I'm serious about that. Fall forward and be diligent about your study, be diligent about working your craft, and be a lifelong learner. I'm, 58 years old and I'm still learning every day. And I learned things tonight from you guys, and just be a sponge and continue to learn and be humble about it, and take it one day at a time. And as Tony La Russa says, deal the hands you're dealt. This COVID thing it is what it is. Take it one day at a time. We're going to get through it.
Hear, hear. Well said. For all of you watching, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next Sunday. Bye, everybody.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.